Welcome to another installment of Accurately Handling Word of Truth out of 1 Corinthians 14. We're talking about verses 29 through 31 tonight. And I just want to finish up with 29. We have been talking about it says, let the prophets speak and let the others judge. And we got through most of that last time, but we got to the word, let the others judge. And that was the end of our time. And so I'm going to take right up at that place where we're going to study what Paul really meant by the word judge. Now, in our culture, judge just is really loaded with implications of criticism and rejection, verbal attacks. The word judge is not a welcoming word in our culture at all. However, the word, when Paul used the word, let the others judge the prophets who speak, he did not intend to make it a thing that was loaded with negatives. The word for judge is the word diakrino, and it simply means, it's just very simple, it just means to separate thoroughly. It's to separate it out. You've got a mixed bag of, I was watching my granddaughter. She got jelly beans for Easter, and she was busy thoroughly separating them, the good ones from the icky ones, right? And that's what Paul means by this thing where it says, let the prophets speak, 2 or 3, and let the others thoroughly separate it. And separate what? That's the very good question that should be answered along the way. Well, prophecies are kind of like that whole bunch of jelly beans that my granddaughter came home with. And now, because they're a mixture too. Prophecies are a mixed bag. I think that is one of the ideas about prophecy that is not well understood in the Christian church, in the new covenant way of living with God, is that we're still hung up on an old covenant way of thinking about prophecies. Is that when a prophecy is spoken, you better not be separating out the good from the not so good. That was a no-no in that Old Testament way. But as throughout the New Testament, especially Paul and Peter and John to some too, when you start looking at their descriptions and exhortations and instructions about prophecy, you find out that and this is one of the clear examples right here, is he says, prophets are going to prophesy, let them do it. But then you've got to thoroughly separate it out, because it's going to be a mixture of good things that you need to embrace, believe, adhere to, and things that you need to let go of. There was a saying that Steve and I and some others along the way got a long time ago. It's a kind of a northern Minnesota way of saying this thing about this mixture of prophecy. We always said concerning all things that were said, whether they were announced as or believed to be prophecy or not, is that whenever people were speaking about the things of God, we needed to eat the meat, spit out the bones. Okay? Now, is there something awful and sinful about spitting out the bones? No, it's a really safe thing to do. And it's important that it be done. The thing that needs to be separated out is that there's things that need to be spit out. And that's probably going to be the case with all New Covenant, the way the Holy Spirit has been dealing with his people since Pentecost, where the Spirit came, and it says right in there, the first thing that Peter says, he says, "This is that which was spoken by the prophet Joel. In the last days I will pour out my Spirit, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. And your young men shall see visions, your old men shall dream dreams, and on my servants and on my handmaids I will pour out in those days of my Spirit, and they shall prophesy." A second time in that one passage. So what we have since the day of Pentecost is a mixed bag where everybody's going to be able to prophesy, and we'll talk about that more in a little while. But the thing about it is that everybody's prophecy, all the sons and daughters of God, it has to be thoroughly separated out. 1 Thessalonians 5:20 through 22 is in the context of prophesying, where he has a whole list of pithy little sayings, good instructions, wonderful, wonderful instructions that he gives to the church in Thessalonica. But what he says is, he says, number one, don't despise not prophesying. So we're talking about prophecy. Paul is talking about prophesying. And immediately after he says that about prophesying, the next thing he says is, prove all things. You know what that word prove is? It's the same word as judge. Diakrino, thoroughly separate. Thoroughly separate all things. Eat the meat, spit out the bones. Be thankful for the meat. Just realize the bones are part of the reality of that wonderful chicken. Okay? Or fish. Okay, or whatever. In there. So thoroughly separate all things. Test with the expectation of approving. I think that is a big one there, because most of us test with the expectation of disapproving what is said. Okay? When we see that idea that we got to thoroughly separate out what people say, I tell you what, we have such a leaning towards saying, okay, I'm going to find out everything that I don't agree with. And yet, this word diakrino, test, judge, prove all things, it's with the expectation of approving. So if it's going to be a mixture, guess what you're going to talk about? The good stuff. Steve was just saying last time is we don't encourage speakers enough. You know, after they get done speaking, one of the worst tortures they go through is when nobody says anything. All you hear is the crickets. And you go away just battling with, what does that mean, that nobody said anything at all, you know? I'd rather have a discussion over something that they had a question about than this. And we need to expect to approve some things. Tell it to the speakers, because God knows, and I know, and all those that speak regularly know, that go through a terrible battle after you get done speaking. So anyway, the next part is prove all things. And this is the third part in there is hold fast to what is good. That's eating the meat. So hold fast to it. You hold one side. It's a bear hug. You grab a hold of it and you give it a big bear hug and say, this is not only was really good, but I take it for myself. I'm going to take this for myself. This is going to change my life along the way. Now that is really good. But the thing is that there's a third or fourth part to this that Paul recommends to the Thessalonians when it talks about prophecy. Not only do you hold on to that which is good and make it a part of your life, you have to abstain from, okay? And abstain from means hold oneself back from, refrain from embracing. Do not refrain from embracing it. What it does not mean is that you immediately correct them. It does not mean you reject the person who spoke it. Does not mean you withdraw from fellowship because there was something in there that wasn't that was too chewy for you, too bony for you. It does not mean to attack them. Okay? Abstain from simply means you don't embrace it yourself. Hold oneself from. You yourself just say to yourself, okay, I'll leave that alone. I'm going to leave that alone. And there's a fifth part to this too. I think it goes on the next page there. All appearance of evil. Abstain from all appearance of evil. As soon as we get into that appearance of evil thing, people immediately think that we're talking about our physical appearance. We're talking about physical appearance. Okay? We're talking about somebody who has their eyes set a little too close, or you don't like their accent. They dress funny. Or maybe they've got some habits when they speak. They pace back and forth. Or they always talk to the people on the right side and they never talk to the people on the left side. And they think that that's the appearances, and if they've got appearances you object to, then you just avoid them. You just leave it alone. Everything. But what it's talking about is it's talking about one's own perceptions of the content of what is said, not how they look. It's the content of what is said that needs to be perceived, carefully separated out, sifted by you. Evil there does not mean what we usually consider to be evil there. There's a word for what we think evil is. Evil, we think, is immorality, violence, just actions that really damage others. Okay, we think of that as evil. Is it? Yes, it is. But there's a Greek word for that, and it's not this one. I don't want to give you a lesson in Greek, but I keep on going back to this thing to separate this thing out, is that when it says abstain from every appearance of evil, it's not talking about, that horrible dictator, or this guy who slashed all our tires in the parking lot, or something like that. What the word for evil here is another word entirely, and it means that which causes labor, pain, trouble, and sorrow. That's a very interesting fork in the road there, is that You can be technically correct in everything you say, okay? Or a prophet can be technically correct in everything they say, and they've got chapter and verse down, and they've got excellent delivery along the way, but what you're left with is a heaviness. You feel like you were, a big load was put on you. It's full of labor. It causes pain. Instead of it being for edification and exhortation and comfort, this prophecy causes you pain. You feel guilty. You feel ashamed. You feel angry. That's a big one today, that our prophets these days are stimulating people's anger by the droves. Is that when they get done speaking, people are all riled up. They're looking for a fight. Okay? And that's the kind of evil that is being talked about here, is that there's plausible deniability in all these things. All these prophets, they can say, yeah, or any speaker that says, I'm speaking as a representative of God, and they're speaking, and they leave you with this sense of labor and pain. It causes trouble. This kind of speaking, although technically correct, and they can deny that they were intended to do it all, but the end result of it is that it causes trouble in the church. It divides people against one another. It hurts people. It puts them under heavy loads. That's the kind of speaking that he says, abstain from it. Abstain from it. Do not give it a hug. Do not embrace it. You embrace the good, that which is unto edification, exhortation, and comfort. You embrace that in prophecy. But you do not embrace this other kind of prophecy that leaves you with sorrow, trouble, pain, and labor. Oh boy, hallelujah. Well, all of us speakers are guilty of a mixture in our speaking where part of it is really good, and yet part of us gets into this thing where it's not good. It's not pleasing to the Lord, and that mixture is up to the hearers to separate that out, thoroughly separate that. Now, there is no requirement, and I've looked it over here, there is no requirement for anybody to give an immediate verbal response out loud in the assembly in judgment of what was prophesied. It's not there. Okay? Now, there are some places where it says that you're supposed to rebuke somebody who causes division in the church, and you're supposed to avoid railers, those that get into arguments a lot, those kinds of things. But there is no place that says that when somebody has prophesied, then somebody has to verbally, out loud, respond to that. That's not what it means by let the others judge. What can happen if there is a requirement to verbally judge, it can end up happening the way it did in Corinth. They dissected speakers. I tell you what, there was a tough crowd in Corinth. And let me just read something from a scholar who studied first century Corinth, and he says the cultural expectation was that the audience should judge the quality of the oratory. Okay, in other words, and judge meant criticize, attack, and all those things that is in our culture that judge means. Most relish the opportunity to be judge and jury of the speaker. A crowd could make or break a speaker. And that's exactly the kind of culture that Paul was saying. That's not the kind of judging that I have in mind when I say, let the others judge. It is a careful sifting. What's required of every person is to carefully inner sift what was said. A careful inner sifting of what was said. That means that there may not be anybody that gives a verbal judgment in the meeting over something that somebody said. But every single person there has to be, because remember we talked about last time, is that this idea that there's a committee of judges in a church, and what their specialty is to judge. And or if there's a group of prophets that their job was to judge prophecy. It's everybody in the congregation has to do that. Now, those that verbally comment on someone's prophecy do not have open season if it is necessary. And I think that should be allowed. If you look on the bottom of that slide there, verbal public response could be necessary. But if it's necessary to verbally comment on somebody's prophecy, here's some things that the commenter needs to be willing to submit to. They need to be willing to submit to the same standards that they are judging the speaker by. So if they're saying, "Well, I don't really think that I can't receive that or this other thing," you got to be realized that same judgment applies to you as well. Okay. Be committed to the let all things be done unto edification principle. So any verbal comments have to be done unto edification, unto edifying. Okay? Be free of partiality and bias toward the speaker. Oh boy. Some people, they just head for the open mic, and you can just see people go, oh, because they've got a predisposition toward that thing already. Or they're going, I wonder if he's going to talk about the same thing he talked about for the last 4 times he was up here. And there's this bias that enters in. I tell you what, this is not easy stuff. He's giving instructions, and he doesn't answer a lot of questions that we have, but he sure does instruct a lot about how to behave yourself in church along the way. Be learning to hear. And that's another thing, is that I have found this to be really true a lot of times, and every speaker will find it, is that later on somebody will come up and they will say something that makes it obvious that what you intended to say was not what they heard. That they, in fact, got it backwards or all wrong from what you intended to say. And that is 2 things. One, you got to be clear when you speak. I got to be clear when I speak. But I also got to learn how to hear when other people are speaking. All of us, and I'm sure this is happening right now amongst the people that are here and amongst those that are watching online, is that you have already been distracted from what I was saying probably 25 to 30 times already. And what you, during those distracted times, what did you hear? You heard Charlie Brown's teacher. No, you know what that is? And then you'll tune back in and you'll go, and that goes for all of us. And you'll go, oh man, that goes for me too. I don't even know what he was talking about, and it sounds bad. So distracted, jump. That's supposed to be jump there. To conclusions. You hear about the first 3 sentences, or they say, I saw something out of Isaiah 54, and I want to share it with you. And you go, Isaiah 54. Oh yeah, I know all about Isaiah 54. I studied it myself. We've had great discussions over it. I already know what he's going to talk about. You don't. Misunderstand the words. Oh yes, that can definitely happen. Hear only part of what was said. Have a bias against it. Yeah, okay, got that down there. If a verbal thing is needed, the only time it would really be needed is if the edification of the rest of the people who heard what that person said, that their edification is going to be damaged. You just know that, hey, if I leave this thing sit here like this, it's going to cause confusion. It's going to cause trouble. It's going to cause people to stumble. So anyway, that's a time when it could be necessary to do that, but it's a two-edged sword there on that way. All right. What Paul envisions when it says, let the others judge, let the prophets speak, and let the others judge, is he envisions an atmosphere in the church where 2 things I see that he is expecting to have happen in order for these instructions to be carried out, is that the church needs to make it easy for believers to use their grace expressions or their spiritual gifts. To make it easy for believers to use their gifts instead of making it so hard for people to use their gifts. And the other thing is that the church needs to have an atmosphere and create an atmosphere where there is freedom and safety to be less than perfect. You don't have to. If you're going to speak in our church, you don't have to be perfect at it. And there needs to be, not simply because it has been stated, this is a safe and free place. You can speak here, but they gotta believe it down in their guts. And most people, no matter how many times it's been said, yeah, we're safe, we're loving, well, most people still don't feel safe or free to do so. And there's some reasons for that I'll get into if I can hurry up along the way here. We're going to go on to verse 30 here. If anything be revealed to another that sitteth by, let the first hold his peace. Okay, so now we're allowing them to speak, 2 or 3. Now we're getting to this sticky little situation here. I'll go through a couple words here. If anything be revealed, the word if there is a word of uncertainty. There may not be anything that's revealed to another that's sitting by. Okay? If something is, okay, well then here's some instructions about it. But there might not be anything that's revealed to another sitting by. And the other word that I think is important to make a distinction about is the word anything there. The word anything was added by the translators. It's not in the original text. But see, we get the idea by that is that it means just anything. That anybody who's sitting while another guy is speaking, if anything comes to your mind, you can interrupt him and bring it up. Anything comes to your mind, you know. He's talking about justification, and you say, excuse me, I think that we should have a bake sale to raise money for carpets or something. No. It's not just anything that's revealed to you. In fact, you might be inspired by the Lord, but it's not just anything that causes there to be an interruption. Do you realize that this is an interruption right in the middle of a public assembly? If anything be revealed, the only things that can interrupt somebody who's already prophesying, already bringing the best they know of the word of the Lord, the only thing that will interrupt him is if there is another revelation from the Lord that will contribute to the edification of the body, will contribute to what's already being edifying to the body already. It's got to be revealed. And revealed, of course, means uncovered to someone's mind by God. Okay? We've all had it happen to us. It's not like revelation is to a certain unique group of superhero Christian types. We've all had this happen where you could be doing anything. You know, I could be putting a new roof on my shed, or I could be washing dishes, or I could be reading the Word, or I could be sitting in a meeting, and suddenly what happens is that they're like something that has always been right in front of my nose, but it was covered. I couldn't see it. I couldn't see it. How many of you have had this happen where suddenly God uncovers and you go, why didn't I see that before? It's always been right there. It's not like he's bringing something from outer space. He is just uncovering the things that are right in front of our nose. And yet there's times where God says, this is the right time. This particular uncovering will edify the church right now, at this point. When that happens, that's worth an interruption. Okay, and I think we'll get to it here, one step at a time along the way. Now, here's what's supposed to happen if somebody has another revelation. Now, the guy who's already speaking, we are taking it for granted, and Paul is taking it for granted. If he's already prophesying, he's got something that was uncovered to him. So what could be worthy of an interruption of something that was uncovered to him by somebody else who had something uncovered to him? It says, let the first hold his peace. That's a big way of saying, be quiet. Stop talking. Stop talking. Here is a situation where somebody who is addressing the assembly is interrupted by somebody else in the audience. Now, here's the question that I want to pose here. Would the God of peace, which is just coming up in 2 verses from here, is that he's the God of peace, and in a few verses beyond that, in verse 40, he's the God of order. Would the God of peace and order allow a situation that has a potential for offense and conflict and disorder? What could be more susceptible to conflict, offense, and disorder than being interrupted in a public meeting while you're speaking? There's a possible explanation. I'm going to lay this out on you. Put on your thinking caps, because this is going to be a little tricky, but I'm going to share it with you anyway, because I think it may be, because, see, lots of people don't understand that there's a discrepancy in here. There's a danger spot in Paul's instructions here. You don't know it unless you've tried it. And then you've had it explode on you. And then you spend who knows how long picking up all the mangled pieces of that, and you go, never going to do that again. And that's what most churches have concluded. Never going to do that again. And they don't. They don't do it. But here's a possible explanation that I have come up with, and it's when you got this first speaker who is speaking. He's addressing the church, and he's prophesying to the people with a prophecy of interpretation, meaning that it could be like a prepared message beforehand, or it could be a teaching about a certain word, or even the recounting of an encounter with God that you had. Something like that along the way. That's a prophecy of interpretation where God did uncover something to you, okay? And you have prepared it from the words that God brought to your mind in the past. So during the last 2 weeks, I have been in the Word looking at what does it mean to let the first one hold his peace? And I think the Lord uncovered something here, but it might be as clear as mud to you. But that's he already did, so I got a chance to write it down. That's a prophecy. I think the Lord showed me something. And now I'm going to pass it on to you. I'm going to report it to you, but I've already prepared it ahead of time. Okay? If there's an interruption of somebody who is prophesying the prophecy of interpretation. For example, if something happened, the fire alarm went off now, or somebody said, I can't take any more of your yakking and we're done here, or whatever, the word, the uncovering that the Lord gave me will not be lost. I can come back to it later. I can come back to it later and take up right where I left off, just like I did. That's like I do. Where I said, I can't go on any further. We'll take up judging next time. Well, 2 weeks later, and here we are, I can simply take up, because what I'm doing is that I'm bringing the Word of God the best I can by interpretation. It's come to me, and I'm reporting to you in my own human words, in my own human abilities, okay? I could use different words. I could say it differently. And in fact, most of the time I go away going, man, I should have said that differently. So, but if that's interrupted, I can come back to it later. The edification in that will not be lost simply because I was interrupted. I can resume that message later. However, I'm thinking that the second speaker who interrupts the first one, he has a prophecy of inspiration, not interpretation, where the first guy is saying, okay, here's what a seed of the idea that the Lord gave me. I'm going to develop that. This one is saying that right in the moment, right while the other person is talking, he gets an inspiration from the Lord. You know what inspiration means? It means to breathe in and then out again. And that's exactly what happens with a prophecy of inspiration, is that right at that moment. How long can you hold your breath? Would it be right for you to hold your breath very long? No. And that's the way it is with this prophecy of inspiration, is that God breathes it into you, and you need to breathe it back out, and there's a sense of urgency to that. There's an urgency to bring that word. Let's see if I can keep track of what I'm saying here. Because to breathe in and breathe out again, to speak specific words that originate directly from God's influence on the one who's going to say them. Now that needs to be done right now. That needs to be done right away, because if it's spontaneous message given by revelation in words that need to be delivered just as they're given, see, you give, freely you received. Now you need to freely give, and it's time sensitive. You can only hold this thing so long. How many of you have ever had an inspiration and there was no opportunity for you to do anything with it, and you went, I will never forget that. And a day or so later you're going, wonder what that was all about. Because the inspiration doesn't last like the interpretation does. See, I can write down the interpretation of a seed of something that God put in my mind, and I can save that, and it's got a shelf life that lasts a long, long time. That's how we got our scriptures, by the way. We got that by the prophecy of interpretation. God put a seed in their minds. They wrote it down. We're benefiting it to this day. We're edified by it to this day. But this prophecy of inspiration is that God breathes it into you. There's only so long you can hold that in, and that's worth interrupting somebody who has something that will keep. Because this will not keep. The benefit and edification of a prophecy of inspiration needs to be given in the moment, and it needs to be delivered just as they were inspired in the moment to speak. Now, to me, that's worth interrupting somebody over, especially if the congregation has been taught what's going on. If two prophets understand what's going on, then I'm looking at that before and I'm going, how can the guy that's speaking, and he's right in the midst of his point that he's making, get interrupted and graciously leave the floor open to somebody who just had a thought? Only way is if the first guy can realize, hey, this guy over here has something that if the edification of it is not brought to the body right now, he will lose the inspiration. He will lose the words that he has in this moment, and the edification to the whole body will be lost. That's worth interrupting over. So I think that there's two different kinds of prophesying that's going on when it says, let the first hold his peace. If anything is revealed to one sitting, let the first hold his peace. That would be worth interrupting over. So that's what I think. Most people probably wouldn't even notice that there's a conflict in there, but there is. If the second speaker is not permitted to interrupt the first speaker, edification for the hearers is lost, because the words will be lost, and the inspiration, and the words end as soon as the inspiration ends. Guy who's prophesying under the prophecy of inspiration, as soon as the inspiration is over, he'd better stop talking, because it's an inspiration of specific words that he needs to pass on to the. Whereas the interpretation, I can say it in all kinds of different ways, and it's still the prophecy of interpretation. Well, let's see what else here. There are other things along the way too There are times when speakers need to be interrupted for other reasons other than because of this difference in inspiration and interpretation. Fact is, some guys talk too long. They started out inspired, but someplace along the line the inspiration ended and their imagination took over from there. The only guy that doesn't know the difference is the guy who's speaking. He probably needs to be interrupted. Boy, we have a hard time with that, and I can see why. We don't want to end up like Corinth, man. The church might not be everything we like it to be, but man, I tell you, I would not want to be in the Corinthian culture trying. Well, they did. Praise God, they did. Paul loved them. Okay, let the first hold his peace. Hold his peace. That just means keep to himself and keep secret. And how can he do that? How can he hold his peace when he's got something important to share? He knows that he can come back to it later, and it will be just as edifying later as it is right now. So he can hold his peace. He can keep it to himself till later, till some other time. There's things that I get all inspired about, and I still haven't shared them in years because it's kind of like it's like the householder, the scribe of the kingdom. That's like a householder, and he puts things both old and new in his pantry. The things I've canned up, they'll keep for a long, long time. The things that are, on the other hand, perishable, they need to be served out right now. And that's the difference between these two kinds of prophecy that are going on, I believe. Enough said about that. So he keeps it to himself. And he can do that graciously because he knows that the edification potential of that word will still be opened up later on and nourish the body. The interruption can never be to ask questions or judge. Okay? The only thing that could be worthy of an interruption is when something that will not keep is revealed to somebody. These rules, and there's a bunch of them there. You can look through from verse 27 all the way down to verse 30 here. That's, those verses in there, all the instructions that were given, all of those rules that Paul gives for how to do speaking in tongues and how to do prophesy, they seem unnecessary, don't they? It's kind of like, don't they need it? But it needs to be remembered that the Corinthian meetings could be loud, competitive, and contentious. In most situations, they were. Let me read something from another scholar who has studied first century Corinth. He wrote a book called After Paul Left Corinth. In other words, what happened to them after Paul left Corinth? Okay. He writes in there, as he studied the culture of Corinth, man, I tell you, rough place. In spite of all their beautiful statues, rough bunch. They created strife by means of trenchant criticism of perceived deficiencies of the speakers. Okay? I mean, those are big words even, They were openly criticizing the deficiencies of another, epitomizing the behavior of the speakers, openly criticizing the deficiencies of another, epitomizing their behavior as well, I didn't get the rest of that on there, but they created strife by trenchant criticism and perceived deficiencies of the other teachers. There was something else here I needed to say here. Let's see if I can find it here real fast. Okay, here is the same guy talking about this thing. This is what you got to remember when you see all these regulations that Paul puts on speaking in public. They had all been raised in a culture where loudly speaking over the top of one another, public displays, boastings, and the like was considered to be a necessary and indeed good part of normal life. This was good, healthy, normal life, to shout a speaker down. In fact, it was especially important for those who wanted to succeed in life. That's amazing, is that you're a young man, you're trying to find a way to make it in life, you want to improve your lot in life. Learn how to cut the other guy down so badly that he can't rise again. That's what Paul came to when he came to Corinth. That's why the instructions are there. We think they're unnecessary. They were necessary, and in many parts of the world, they still are. You should see meetings in the Middle East, or in East Africa. Yeah. All right. Let me go on here. Verse 31. Oops. Let me go back here. See if there's anything more here. For you may all prophesy one by one, that all may learn and all may be comforted. How many alls in that one sentence? 3. 3 alls in there. And they're interesting. But the first word that I got to see is the word for. And for is the old King James way of saying because. So in order for him to say because you may all prophesy, you got to know that there was a question beforehand. And what was going on beforehand is all these regulations of speaking in tongues and prophesying. And he says, you need all these regulations because you may all prophesy. And you may all learn. And you may all be comforted. This is the reason for those regulations, is in verse 31 here. Because the Corinthians are saying, why? And Paul is saying, because. And he tried, and in fact, by the end of this chapter, you'll see that he finally pulls out his biggest guns, and he says, and they're saying, I don't see why we need to follow your instructions. And he says, because I said so. He says, if you think you're spiritual, acknowledge that what I say is the word of the Lord. But right now, he's trying to be reasonable with them, and they're saying, I don't see why. And he's going, because if you follow the instructions, all of you will prophesy. You'll all prophesy. All of you will learn. All of you will be comforted. He's saying there's good benefits for you in this, but as a 2-year-old or a 15-year-old will both say is, why? Okay, so this is what we have here. This is why you need to let someone interrupt you. See there? That's just what he finished talking about, and now he's saying, this is why you need to allow someone to interrupt you. because what they say takes priority in that situation. Next words are ye may. For ye may all prophesy. Ye may is the most weak. I don't know why the King James scribes huddled together and decided to give the Greek word here the most weak and limp-wristed construction that they could. Ye may. The word there is dunamis. You have the power. You didn't know that, did you? I didn't know it either. What he says is, it's not saying, oh, you may or you may not, if you feel like it, if you don't feel it. He says, you have dunamis. You are able. Dunamis means to be able to have power. And 3 different areas that I've seen that you have power in. You may be able in 3 different areas. Personal ability. You have the power because you have permission, and you have the power because you have the opportunity. These are the 3 areas that Paul is talking about here when he says you may prophesy, you may learn, and you may be comforted, is that you have ability, you have permission, and you have an opportunity. Let's see these things. You have a personal opportunity. That, I put down a couple of verses here. I'm quoting again Acts 2:17 and 18, which I already said, it shall come to pass in the last days that I'll pour out my Spirit on all flesh. Look at the word all in there. There's 3 alls in this little sentence here, and it all comes up again when it talks about prophesying under the power of the Spirit in Acts. All flesh, everybody, okay, not just a select elite few. And because of that verse, you have the personal ability. God's Spirit made us able to prophesy. It says, and they shall prophesy. And guess what that word shall is? It's the same word as you may. It means they have the power to prophesy because the Spirit was poured out upon all flesh. And then in 1 Corinthians 14:1 and 39, 2 different places, he urges and he's just pleading and being a cheerleader, asking them, saying, prophesy, prophesy, prophesy. Why would he urge us to zealously do something that he knew we weren't capable of doing? But the fact of the matter is that we all have the personal ability to prophesy. Now, you may not have this grace expression, this expression of God, where you very often or maybe at all get this prophecy of inspiration where he breathes into you and you're going, I got to tell somebody. I mean, you may have had this at different times in your life where you went around, I got to tell somebody, and the only thing you had was a telephone, and so you called up people and stuff like that. That's the prophecy of inspiration that says, I got to let this out because this won't wait. And that you may not always have, but every one of us have the personal ability to prophesy with the prophecy of interpretation, where you say, God put a thought in my head and I looked it up and I developed it a little bit and here's what I came up with. That's prophecy too. That's prophecy too. Okay? So everyone has the ability to prophesy. Next is you have permission to prophesy. Now, look at these verses here. We haven't got to them yet, but they are verses that most of the church has interpreted to say that, no, you don't have permission to prophesy. Just a couple verses down. You can see them there if you want to, but then you'll be distracted and you'll get all mad, and then you won't hear the rest of what I got. No, I can't say much more anyway. So you have permission to prophesy, but there are certain verses that are taught to mean that you don't. There is certain groups that do not have permission to talk. They do not have permission to give the word of the Lord. They do not have permission to do so. We'll get to those next time, because I have been prophesying by the prophecy of interpretation, which means I'll can this up and it'll be ready. Look at